You're listening to the Paranormal Peeps on the Darkcast Network. Come to the dark side of indie podcasts with the Darkcast Network.
We have cookies. Between the realm of the dead and the journeys of the living, join Josh, Jamie, and Elisa as they delve into the vast world of the paranormal and breathe life back into the history of the departed.
Welcome to Creepy Tapas,
the show where two spooky best friends give you tiny tastes of terror connected by a common ingredient.
We serve up movie reviews, mysteries, murder, mayhem, and tantalizing tales from the depths of the internet, and some random bullshit too, all focused around a similar theme.
We blend our love of horror, oddities, and general creepiness and dig a little deeper, discovering the history, psychology, and truth behind your wildest fears.
Join us, Ash and Jordan, as we descend into full darkness every Sunday, wherever you listen to podcasts.
It's Creepy Tapas, y'all.
What?
Proud members of the Darkcast Network.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Paranormal Peeps podcast. I'm Josh.
And I'm Jamie.
And we are coming to you from our new podcast dungeon.
Yeah, so we've been on hiatus a little bit because we decided we were going to go ahead and redo the whole podcast area.
Yeah, it looks nothing like it used to.
Well, I don't know that they really knew what it looked like before too much. I mean, it was a big, 5-foot round table, right?
With some microphones around it.
With some microphones and chairs.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it.
Yeah, nothing.
And we had a backdrop, and that was it. But we've changed all of that.
Yeah.
We took the table away.
Yeah, there's no table.
No table. We got some really nice white, big, fluffy, comfy chairs. Nice rug, a new backdrop, new bookshelves with all the cool stuff up there.
And this is all to get us ready so we can start doing video podcasting this year.
Yeah, so you'll be able to watch it or just listen to it. Either or.
Yeah. So stay tuned, everybody. It is coming to YouTube near you.
Later this year.
Yep, later this year. Probably after summer.
Yeah, so more in the fall.
All right, so let's get on to this week's topic, which for me is kind of a fun one because I remember doing a report on this in 6th grade.
Yeah, I didn't.
And honestly, I have no idea how I got onto this subject. Like, it was like for a science class or whatever. But we are going to talk about Chernobyl.
Yeah, so we were going to do a whole episode on this, but looking into it, nobody has spent enough time there to really report any paranormal phenomena going on.
Not a ton.
No, very little. Not enough to do an hour show.
No, there's not.
No.
The problem is now nobody can go there.
Nope.
So if you don't know, it's actually located in the country of Ukraine, and it is now currently occupied by Russian forces, and so it's an active war zone. Nobody's getting in there right now.
No, wouldn't want to anyways.
Exactly. Wouldn't want to. Before we get into the actual disaster and the reported hauntings, just kind of talk a little bit about how this reactor was built, just for some context. So the reactor lid is actually 50 feet thick, and coming out of it is 1,661 uranium fuel rods.
That's crazy.
That is crazy. So as these atoms split off the fuel rods, right, that creates a tremendous amount of heat. And that heat is used to turn the water that's inside the reactor to steam. And that steam then spins this giant turbine.
Yep.
And of course, if you have that much water, you got to have water pumps constantly circulating water. And then obviously you don't want to get this whole thing out of kilter, right? Because you don't want it to explode. So you have to have something to control it. And so to control these nuclear reactions, they use 212 graphite-tipped boron rods. So those act like the brake and the accelerator to a nuclear reaction. Put the rods further in, so the full length slows it down. Pull them up, the reaction starts to speed up some more. So this is going to come very crucial to understand this as we get into what happened on April 26th, 1986 at 1:23 in the morning.
Yeah, I have a question. Why were they running this test at those wee hours in the morning like that?
They were ordered to.
Yeah, but why? Why would you do it in the morning? Like at 1:30 in the morning?
It's a good question. You know what? Honestly,
to me, it seems like an odd time. But there again, I don't know anything about this nuclear stuff and all that. So I don't know.
Well, I think the reason why they ran it so early in the morning is because in order to run the test, we'll get into how this test works as part of the problem, but you basically have to shut the reactor down.
Okay.
And so obviously you don't want to shut it down in the middle of the day. People want energy. And then it's like, oh, well, guess what? You got nothing.
During normal operating hours.
Exactly.
Okay. That does make sense.
Yeah. Okay. So there are 3 key players that we are going to track throughout the story. There's Leonid, and he is the senior reactor control engineer. There's Alexander, who is the shift foreman. And there is Anatoly Dyatlov, deputy chief engineer. He's the one that's actually in charge of the reactor shift.
Okay.
So he's the man with the power, so to speak. As we touched on, that this was a whole part of a safety test that was actually being run.
It's kind of ironic.
It is ironic. Well, the interesting thing is the reason why they're running the safety test. Okay, so 1986, for those of you who weren't alive during the 80s, this was the height of the Cold War. And so obviously Russia, at this point in time, it was the Soviet Union, the USSR, and they were concerned about the safety of the reactors because they had built one in Iraq and Israeli forces actually bombed it.
Oh, dang.
And so they were like, well, we need to be concerned about how these reactors react in case we get hit by the Americans. Like, we got to be, careful how this stuff reacts, how the backup systems work. And so that's why they're running these tests. So it makes a lot of sense.
It does make sense.
The one thing that nobody knew is that this reactor actually had a fatal flaw to it.
Which was?
When run at low power, it became highly unstable.
I wonder why.
That's a good question. We'll talk about what actually happens in the reactor, but I think it's because it's kind of like taking those top fuel dragsters. Like, you want them running at high RPMs, high speed. And when they start running lower, they get kind of funky and they can start blowing rods and engine parts and stuff. So it's probably kind of a similar like that. It's like taking out your hot rod and trying to do 5 miles an hour with it.
Why own a hot rod at all then?
Right? Exactly. Okay, so we're going to start at 12:31 in the morning. We get into an argument. So Leonid actually tells Dyatlov that, hey, you want us to do this safety test at 200 megawatts. But in reality, this test is supposed to be run between 700 and 1,000 megawatts. And obviously, Dyatlov, being the individual in charge, doesn't really care for that too much.
It sounds like it's more of a I'm in charge and you will not question me.
That's exactly what it is. So he tells him, look, if we run it at this lower temperature, we're going to save water and there's no risk. So we're just going to go do it.
Famous last words.
Right? Exactly.
There's no risk.
So they actually start to wind down the power, but it actually starts to kind of drop faster than expected.
Okay.
So at 36 after midnight, we start getting alarms saying the water levels are dangerously low in the reactor. Funny thing is this is a pretty common alarm that they're dealing with. And so they don't actually think anything of it.
They kind of overlook it.
They overlook it. But the water's meant to keep the reactor cool.
Yep.
And to keep things flowing. 2 minutes later, the reactor comes to a complete halt. So the power drops so fast that the reactor basically shuts off. This actually really makes Dyatlov mad and now sets up the course for what actually ends up happening. So he actually then orders the control rods to be pulled up and out, all the way out, which means there's no brakes. The thing's got no brakes on it.
Full throttle.
Exactly. So Leonid actually questions Dyatlov on this move, and He's like, this is against our training. And Alexander, the safety officer, he agrees and says like, hey, we should be very careful what we're doing, right? Thing is, Dyatlov is so angered and so angry with this actual suggestion that he's like, look, if you can't do this, get out. And you order someone else to take his place and to actually turn the thing back on. A little arrogance going on, isn't there?
It's so stupid.
Okay, so 42 minutes after midnight, the reactor power is back up from the replacement for Leonid's replacement. The power starts rising inside the reactor, just like, it should, because the control rods are pulled out.
Right.
52 minutes after midnight, there's another water alarm going off. Again, they're like, whatever.
They just dismiss it.
Yeah, they just dismiss it.
I mean, come on now, people. These alarms are put there for a reason.
Yes.
You should pay attention to them.
They should.
Even though it's a common one. You
Yes.
should still pay attention.
The problem is that their training was flawed and lied.
Obviously.
So their training said that this was a common occurrence. It was not a big deal.
Just carry on.
And just carry on.
Yeah.
Exactly. So 1:03 in the morning, the power's back up to 200 megawatts, which is right where Dyatlov wants to start the test. And so Alexander's like, hey, do we start the test? And yet he still tries and says, hey, look, we should bring it up to 700 because that's what the safety protocols.
Probably the minimum it should be, right?
That's the minimum, right?
Yeah.
Well, Dyatlov takes a different approach to him in this avenue. And he's like, look, I'm the deputy chief engineer in charge. Under my authority, I can change the parameters of the test. And so I'm going to, and we're going to do it at 200.
Stupid.
Yeah, right. So 109, once another water alarm goes off. But now something is happening in the reactor that nobody has any idea. There's actually a hot spot building at the bottom of the reactor. The sensors don't always pick this up. So it's just starting to slowly build inside this reactor. This is that fatal flaw that we talked about, it running at low power.
Right.
So at 112, the pressure starts to rise and grow inside the reactor, but nobody knows it in the control room. So nobody has any idea. Again, the alarms are not going off.
Aren't they supposed to be going off at this point? Like, shouldn't there be some indicator going on?
Should be, but there's not. Nobody has any idea what's going on.
Oh, boy.
So 117. Now, this is 6 minutes before they start the safety test. It's also 6 minutes before 123 when the explosion happens. If you've putting those two together, right? Mm-hmm. The hot spot's still growing at the bottom of the core. So it's still getting hotter, and they still have no idea. All right. So 122. The test is started. Now, this is how the test works. They shut off the power to the massive turbine and let it coast. Okay. So that means the power stops on the piece. The other part is that turbine is what pumps the water through everything.
Right.
Now, the backup diesel generators will kick in. This is part of the test. But there's a 40-second delay between the diesel generators kicking on and the water starting to flow after the big turbine stops and coasts.
Ah.
Yeah. So without water, the reactor can boil dry.
Yep.
Like an immense kettle.
Just evaporates that water.
Exactly. And no one knows that there's a hot spot in the bottom of the core.
Oh, boy.
Which means you shut that water off, that water's gone.
Yeah.
Okay, so 123, the turbine winds down, less water is being pushed through the core, more and more steam is generated, and there's less and less water.
Right.
Steam pressure builds in the inside of the hotspot and spreads to the pump room. Steam pressure is so high that the 700 plus pound caps on the fuel rods start lifting upwards.
Oh, dang.
An unexpected power surge happens, and the engineers press the emergency AZ5 button. So what this button does is it immediately slams all of the control rods back down full length. It's like the all stop, holy crud, we're in trouble.
Yeah, this is where they know that there's a problem.
Yes, this is where they know there's a problem, and this is their final straw. This is where they actually blow it in the literal sense. So these rods are tipped with graphite, which I mentioned before. So when they first come in contact with water, there's actually a power surge.
Oh, geez. It's
So
like lighting a match and throwing it on gasoline.
yeah, with nitroglycerin on top of it.
There you go.
From the moment the button was pressed to the explosion, the power increases 100 plus times. The power was doubling every second.
Oh, that's scary.
So at 1:23:48, so at 1:23, they started, and 48 seconds later, it's over.
Boom.
The reactor explodes like a volcanic pressure cooker. The 500-ton safety cap is blown off the reactor.
Like an empty beer can.
Yeah. 50 tons of radioactive fuels released into the atmosphere, which is 10 times the amount of the Hiroshima bomb.
Oh, man.
And remember, this is April 26th at 1:30 in the morning.
Right.
April 22nd or 27th at 2 p.m., so 2 in the afternoon, they start evacuating the town of Pripyat.
Why'd they wait that long?
Because they kind of denied how bad it was.
Oh, boy. Come on, people.
Right?
Oh,
I mean, it was bad. I mean, the thing was burning. The reactor was on fire. It was bad. All in all, from the initial disaster, 32 people were killed.
sad.
Very sad. Now, the part that's crazy is it took 36 hours to evacuate the 50,000 people from Pripyat,
Okay.
which is a town located 1 kilometer from the reactor.
Right.
So, I mean, it's right there.
Yep.
They set up that 30-kilometer exclusion zone, and it took a week to evacuate the full 135,000 people from that whole 130-kilometer area. So Akimov, that's Alexander, he died 15 days after the explosion. Leonid died 3 days after Akimov.
Wow.
Dyatlov received 5 lifetimes of radiation and survived until he had a heart attack in 1990.
Well, that just figures. The one who basically hands are, he has blood on his hands.
Yeah.
He's the one that survived.
Yeah. He's the one that survived.
What a load of crap.
I know. And a lot of people, I was asking the same question too. Like, why didn't they actually get more assertive with Dyatlov? Right? Why didn't they just really stand up to him, right?
Well, what if it was like is it because it's a different culture and you don't question your superiors?
Well, it's part of that, right? It's part of obviously they're part of the Russian government and those pieces, right?
Right.
But there's also another piece to it. To be a nuclear engineer at the time, it was super highly prestigious and it was really well paid.
I'm sure.
So they and their families got to live in Pripyat, which is, really close to the reactor. The shops were well stocked. They had that amusement park. And while the people of Pripyat didn't have to worry about necessities, the average Soviet citizen at the time had to worry about housing, food, clothing, medical service, all of these things. And so if they were to disobey and get really bad in trouble, they'd lose this beautiful lifestyle. And most of them would probably get sent to Siberia.
Better than losing your life, I suppose. I don't know.
Well, but
I guess it depends on who you talk to.
Exactly. And one of the other flaws to this whole thing is that the reactor was rushed. So reactor number 4, that safety test wasn't supposed to be run that night. It was supposed to be run before the reactor opened.
Oh, so they messed up there too.
They messed up there. Well, why? Right? Because even the KGB warned that there was issues with this reactor, but that was pushed away. Even the KGB couldn't touch this, which is amazing considering how strong the KGB was during the Cold War. But the director and his senior managers, they wanted to rush the reactor opening. They and their bosses got big bonuses, and so they pushed safety around second.
All for greed.
Yeah. So there were accidents that were covered up. Incorrect materials were used. One good example of this is the roof over the reactor, the reactor building, supposed to be made of fireproof materials. Well, that was going to take time to get these materials. So they used combustible materials instead.
Oh my gosh. Where do you start with the stupidity?
Exactly.
The list, it just keeps growing.
The list keeps growing. Yeah, exactly. So that's the accident as it was. Okay, so on to the paranormal part of this. Most of these stories are going to be really hard to collaborate with, right? Because one, it's been an exclusion zone, so people who go in there aren't supposed to be there.
Right.
And other stories, the people who would know are dead. So it's kind of this mixed bag of like, what do you believe? Is it legend? Is it paranormal? Like, where do we go from there? But the reportings are there's shadowy figures that are said to lurk in the decay, which,
okay.
Yeah, we can give that, right? There's screams, shouts, and strange noises that are said to be heard from empty buildings.
Okay, now I can understand that. Think about this. Think of the level of panic that people had.
Yes.
Okay. That sort of emotion to that extent, I think that would imprint on the environment. So they may be residual, but you're still going to hear them.
Yeah.
Right. And I could definitely see that being the case.
Yeah, I can too. Now, there's also been reported moving shadows and mysterious lights or figures that have been reported in front of vacant windows and reportedly have been photographed. Now, with that one, I actually read an article. It was on this website called Medium. It's a blog website where people can just write articles about different things on there. And so I read a long article about a person who did take a tour there because they had tours up until recently. And they were there. And they were up looking up at a 3rd-story window, and there something was walked in front of the window and walked back. When they went to go check out that building, you couldn't get to the 3rd floor.
Ooh, so yeah, good question is like, what was that?
Exactly. And so this last one, which is kind of the most ironic and interesting one of it, it's reported that there was a terrifying creature that rose above Pripyat in the days leading up to the disaster. Right? It was said to be a hideous humanoid with giant wings, a black headless body, and glowing red eyes. It was called the Black Bird of Chernobyl.
Wait a minute. If it is a headless body, how does it have glowing red eyes?
I don't know. But
like, are you sure it wasn't like glowing red nipples? I mean, because where's its head? How can you say it had glowing red eyes when you said it's headless?
It had it in its clavicles.
Oh my. This is so... Okay.
Well,
All
what's interesting is the actual description of this creature has been linked to the description, some of the descriptions of Mothman. Very similar descriptions of Mothman.
But Mothman isn't headless.
Some people claim it is.
I don't know that I've heard that. I don't recall hearing that Mothman was headless.
Well, that's what they're saying. So I don't know. I mean, basically what they're trying to do is they're trying to say that this thing existed 3 days before the accident and then was seen after the accident. Well, here's the problem. Anybody who saw it before the accident is dead.
Yeah.
And so there's no real eyewitness reports of this thing.
Well, and all I can say is I'm really skeptical, obviously, as
yes.
I think most people hearing this would be. But I also have to say I wasn't there, so
right.
I couldn't tell you.
Well, and the interesting thing is that whole exclusion zone is kind of like the Paris catacombs, where you have groups of people who go in and have mapped the hot spots and all of this stuff, just like they've done with the catacombs, and they even have their own names. They're called stalkers, is what the nickname that's given to them.
Interesting.
Very interesting. And so, like, they go in there and they know the areas. And so that's where a lot of these reports are coming from. Well, of course, you're not going to put your name on it.
Well, no, because you've trespassed multiple times.
You're not supposed to be there.
You're not going to go out. I mean, if you're smart, you're not going to go out and advertise it.
Exactly. But what's interesting is, if you remember, Destination Truth with Josh Gates went to Pripyat.
They did, but they also had permission.
They did. And it was episode 4, season 3, and it aired on September 30th, 2009. this was the episode that really kind of made me want to go and do this as a paranormal episode, because when they were in there investigating, anytime they got EMF or like they got any type of readings on any of their equipment, or there was paranormal activity starting to happen, their Geiger counters went off and they had to leave the area.
That is interesting. It makes you wonder, is it a bunch of radioactive spirits in the area?
It's very possible.
I mean, I don't think that's as far-fetched as you'd think it is.
I don't think it is either. But also, if you think about it, right, spirits need energy to manifest. Mm-hmm. Well, if you have radioactive energy around your area, you can gather that to manifest and to use that energy.
Well, that's the theory, right?
Exactly. And so you could have that happening, and that's how you get these ghosts showing up.
Maybe. I mean, it's one of those things that I guess more than likely we will never know.
Exactly. I mean, I would love to go to there when it's safe to go. And I don't mean like safe radiation wise, right? Because it's technically safe radiation wise now.
Parts.
But it's obviously not safe because of
the conflict
going on over there.
Yeah.
So I do have one last account of what happened there. And this was actually showed up in a blog post on Ranker. So this was actually, according to this post, it's like a secondhand account.
Okay.
Over a decade following the radioactive tragedy, a physicist from New York traveled to Chernobyl to conduct tests. He claimed he was close to the door of reactor 4 when he heard someone screaming from inside. It sounded like the person was screaming about a fire, or that they were trapped inside of a fire. The physicist ceased his testing to listen further, but realized reactor 4 was completely sealed off. No one can get into that area without being granted access, and he had been the only one in the building that day, as far as he was told. Later that evening, the physicist was eating outside by the river with a colleague. As he was recounting the strange story from the earlier that day, they noticed a floodlight turn on from inside the building. They knew no one was in the building, and as soon as they stated it must be faulty wiring or a surge, the light turned back off. To say the scientist was a little freaked out is an understatement.
Well, I mean, that would be a little unnerving because it's sealed so that nobody can even get in there.
Right.
But you hear cries about a fire or someone in a fire. You know, they're crying for help. I mean, and then you see a light come on from within.
Yeah.
And then turn back off. I mean,
so there was a maintenance guy who was down on that reactor level, and his colleague asked him to go get a bucket of paint so they could do some more painting down in that area. And the paint room was right next to the reactor.
Oh.
When the reactor exploded, he was vaporized.
Oh my.
His buddy went to go look for him and died trying to find him.
Oh, geez. That's sad.
So was he hearing one of those two guys? Very possible.
Yeah, that would be. Yeah, once you kind of know more details about it, the whole thing's just sad.
It is.
Even for the people that were being, I don't know, using poor judgment. It's still sad.
Yeah.
It's still sad that the whole thing had to happen because it affected so many.
It did. It affected hundreds of thousands of people in and around the area. Mm-hmm. But also, that was the event that really made the world start to look and back off of nuclear power.
Right.
And so who knows what would have happened, how things would be different had this incident not happened.
Well, and that's true. I mean, I'm a very big believer that things work out the way they're meant to.
Yeah.
Good or bad.
This is true.
And sometimes from the bad, the hopes is with the bad, there comes good and a lesson.
Right.
Sometimes many lessons.
Lessons is don't do stupid things.
Get over your ego.
Yes.
Get over yourself.
So I hope you guys liked this episode. This was a fun one for me to go through and do all the research on and to get this together. And if you guys did enjoy it, please like and subscribe. And as always, stay ghosty, my peeps.
The Missing Magnolias podcast tells the stories of the missing and murdered.
Ultimately, these kids went into state custody and they never came out.
Together with missing persons expert Dr. Michelle Janice, we uncover the real true crime experience.
Every time we do another interview, I'm like, how do we find so many badass women?
We hear from victims who turn their pain into something positive.
We didn't find out till we were 11 or 12 years old that our mom was murdered.
In Times Square, it said Mickey Shunick fought for her life.
And experts who think outside the box to solve cases.
I scour missing persons databases like NAMUS to see if they're uploaded to that database.
Subscribe to Missing Magnolias on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts today.
Thank you for listening to the Paranormal Peeps podcast. You can find us on social media at Twitter at CPR Paranormal, on Facebook at Paranormal Peeps Podcast and Cold Spot Paranormal Research. And you can find us on Instagram at coldspot_paranormal_research.